Hello everyone, this is James Shore with another how-to video. I'm recording this on November 28th, 2015. In this chapter, we have been test driving our tab application, getting to the real meat of the problem that we're solving here in this series. And in the last episode, we had just finished modifying our code so that it displayed the default element. So if you recall, we have got multiple tabs that we want to be able to display. In this example, we have 3, but really we're designing this to support any number of tabs. And those tabs have associated content. And when this initializes, we want all the content except for the main content tab to show up. And that's what we had just finished in the last episode. In previous episodes, we made all the content tabs disappear, and now we have just one disappearing. And the way we're making that disappear is by setting a class on the tab that is actually going to disappear. And in this code, we don't care what class that is. That's the responsibility of the caller, which we haven't implemented yet. And now it's time to go through our test-driven development cycle once again. Think red, green, refactor. What we need to do next is think about what do we want to do next. And here in our to-do list, we've got some ideas. One thing that we haven't done is we haven't set this up so that it marks the primary tab as active. We want to be able to apply a class to the tab so that when the tab is active, it's styled a little bit differently. And again, we don't have to worry about what that styling looks like in our JavaScript code. We can just say, give me a class to deal with it, and we'll go. And I think that's a good thing for us to do next. So let's go ahead and do that. So looking at our test, we've got it hides all content elements except for the default upon initialization. Preserves existing classes when hiding a content element. Then I think I'll add a new test, which is it styles the active tab with a class. And it occurs to me we might want to have on this one too, it preserves other classes on the active tab, or preserves existing classes on the active tab. Or maybe we'll just modify this test to work the same way. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to just put this in as a to-do for us to come back to. Now, I could have written this code. I could have put the styles active tab with a class in here in this first test, but I think these are different concepts, and that's why I'm putting it in its own test, even though we're going to see very similar initialization. And the fact that we have all this similar initialization makes me wonder about duplication. And I know I've mentioned this in previous episodes as well. I just don't know how to best solve this. Now, if we're going to do this, we are going to need to pass in the active tab. And I suppose that means that we need to modify our initialize function once again to take the tabs. But I don't think we need to refactor the existing code just yet. I think we can sneak up on this. Let's do this. Let's just go ahead and get this started. So we're going to need a default element. And we're going to need the default tab. And that's really all we need if we're just checking to see if we've styled the active tab. One of the things that I've learned over time is that we really want these tests to only talk about the things that they care about. So we don't need this to have more than one tab because we're only looking at the active tab, and that's going to be the default. So let's say this. Styles the default tab with a class, and then we will initialize it. And we'll pass in a list of tabs. Remember, this is design. So what I'm thinking is that we'll have a list of tabs, a list of content elements, the default element, and then some CSS. So the tabs are going to be the default tab. The content is going to be the default element. Default, of course, is going to be default element. And content hide class will be irrelevant, ignored, I should say. And then we'll also need the active tab class, which will be, well, let's just call it active tab. This makes me think that maybe we should rename content hide class to be more like hidden content class to be more in line with this. Let me make a note on that. Again, normally I'd be writing these down on an index card, or if I was pairing, asking whoever's navigating, whoever's not at the keyboard, to be writing it down. Or more likely, the person who's not at the keyboard would be the one coming up with these ideas, because the navigator tends to have more brain power available because they're not worried about the actual coding part. They can think about more stuff. All right, so if we do this, we're going to want to then assert that the classes on the default tab, which is going to be an element, are active tab. Now, as I look at this, how are we going to know that default tab is the right, how are we going to connect these two? I suppose one way to do it, would be to assume, I think we want to assume that these two things are in the same order, that we're going to have the list of tabs, the list of content, and that, the first tab is what controls the first content element. And then, well, let's worry. I think this is the way we want to do this for now, but I'm actually wondering if maybe we want to switch the default to be the default tab rather than the default element. Something to come back to. But I think for now we can make this work. Let's go ahead and see this fail. Let's see, we have one failure, and we're expecting active tab, but we're getting null because there is no classes on the default tab. So that's good. Now we need to make this pass. So let's make an options dot tabs, a tabs variable. We're going to need to throw an error when tabs is undefined. But I'm not going to do that yet because that would cause our other tests to break because they don't pass in that tabs. So we'll come back to that. And then now we need some way of making that tab go. And I guess just to start out with, what we can say is just tabs0.classlist.add. Oh, and we'll need the class, don't we? It's active tab class. That will make this pass. I think. Now, this is obviously not good enough. We need to handle the case when the active tab is not the first one, but this will allow us to sneak up on the problem. So let's go ahead and see our green bar. No, that did not work. Oh, right, because we don't have the tabs in all cases. Well, let's just do it this way now. For now, we'll say if tabs is not undefined, then we will do it. So what was happening is some of our other tests weren't defining tabs, and so when we tried to say tabs.classlist, it was failing. Saying cannot read property 0, that means that it wasn't able to find anything on tabs. Anyway, so I just cheated. That's obviously not good, but now we can refactor. So let's do this. We need to have our other tests have some sort of tab, and really they need to have the same number of tabs as they have content, right? So let's do it this way. Let's say add element div and we'll call this one default tab just to be more clear. And that should work just fine. We haven't changed any behavior. We've just added the tabs to that test. We also need to add our active tab class. And that should work just fine. And now let's do the same thing for our other tests. We'll need a var default tab and our hidden tab. And our active tab class. And that works just fine. And now we should be able to add in our sanity check here. Yep, that works fine. And we should also be able to add in our active tab class sanity check. Let's put it all in the same order. And that's all working good. So that's a nice step forward. Well, we've got a couple of, so we're still in the refactor stage. I am increasingly dissatisfied with our test code though. There's a lot of duplication here and I don't think it reads very clearly. All this tab stuff, all these additional things that we're initializing, I feel like it's making it harder to understand what's going on. So let me just make a note that we need to finish the active tab code. Right now, it's hard-coded to use the first element. But I'm going to check in what we've got so far. So we style the active tab, but we assume it's the first, so it's not done yet. All right, let's go back and I see some cleanup here we can do. This add element div is not terribly helpful. I don't think it's as clear as it could be. What I'd like to do is make a new method call or a new function called add tab, or better yet, create tab. And it's going to be the exact same thing. There's not going to be any difference here. But I think it's going to make the code read more clearly. And in fact, let's do it this way. Let's say that the tab's inner HTML is just tab. That way, if we ever need to do any debugging, it'll be easier to see what's going on. Now, I think that will work. No, it doesn't. Saying cannot read property class list of undefined. And that probably means we forgot to return something. And yeah, right here, forgot to return tab. Whenever I see an undefined show up, that usually means I didn't pass something through, or I didn't define, or I didn't return a value. There we go. Okay, now we can go back through and do the same thing here and here. And here. And here. And that should all work. Now let's do the same thing for our content elements. In fact, let's call it create tab content, like that. And here, I'm going to do effectively the same thing, only we'll put content in there. And that should work. It does, good. This may seem like a pointless refactoring to you, but it's really about decreasing the mental burden for people who are reading this in the future. Rather than having to decipher create element, now they can just see that we're saying create tab content and they understand exactly what that element is meant to represent. Okay, and that should still work. And it does. And now I think I'm going to go through and I'm going to rename these to be content 1, default content, and content 3. And the same thing here, default content, hidden content, and default content. And that should still work. And it does. And looking at this, I think we can go even further because, again, what we want in these tests is that we really want to focus the test on what matters. So the tabs don't matter for this test, which is about hiding content elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to inline these to make it more clear that the tabs are not important because they're not going to get a variable. So clearly we're not going to refer back to them. So the way to inline, again, is to take the existing variable and cut out what it referred to and put that in its place, like that, except without the semicolon, and then delete the first one. So that should still work. There we go. And I'm going to do that with the remainder. Now, WebStorm has a built-in refactoring for inline. It's on the Mac, it's Command Option In, like that. And on Windows, I believe it's Control-Shift-N, but I'm not entirely sure. You'll have to look in the menu. It's up here under Refactor. Let's see, let me show you. If you click here, you can go to Refactor and then Inline, and you'll see the shortcut key on it. So we're going to say inline on this, and it will automatically move that in and get rid of the variable. And then same here, we're going to get rid of tab 3 by moving it into here. And there we go. So that makes it more clear what's going on here, I think. And then I think we can do the same thing down here. Preserves existing classes when hiding a content element. The hidden tab, well, the default tab is not relevant. But the default content is. So there we go. And similar here, all of this matters, except for this one, except for this content hide class. Let's see if that's working. It is. I want to take this even further though. I want to tell, for example, in this test, the active tab class is irrelevant. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a new constant called irrelevant. The whole point here is to try to make the code easier to read. Am I succeeding at that? I don't know if I am or not, but I'm trying. So I'm making a variable called irrelevant. I'm putting it in all caps to signify that it is a constant. This is not really a constant in JavaScript in that I can change it and JavaScript won't complain. But by putting it in all caps, that tells other readers of this code that it's meant to be a constant. And by calling it irrelevant, I think I'm drawing attention to the fact that you can ignore the active tab class in this case. Similarly here, and here. All right. So I've simplified the tests, I think. You tell me whether or not you think this is actually simpler. As always, design is subjective. It's hard to tell as the programmer whether or not you're making things easier to understand or harder to understand because your head's right in it, right? So that's why it's very easy to create sort of these bizarre designs that make total sense to you but don't make sense to anybody else. It's why it's so useful to have other people to run things by and see what they think. In this case, I don't have anybody to run things by, at least not while I'm recording this, so you'll have to tell me after the fact whether or not you think this makes the code easier to understand. And if you don't think it makes it easier to understand, then your challenge is to refactor the code to make it better than what I have now. I'll often find that when I'm working with some code, if I come back to it later, I'll come up with new ideas about how to make it even better. At any rate, if we look at our to-do, I think I would like to change the default to refer to the tab rather than the content element. But as I look at the time, it looks like we've done quite a bit already. So let's go ahead and stop here. And next time we will take another pass around this loop. Your exercise for this time is, as always, to follow along with what we've done so far. Go ahead and make this new test to style the default tab with a class and implement it just as we've done here, just by getting the first one in. So it's not totally done yet. And look at how you can improve your test. You can either follow along with what we've done, or you can try to come up with better abstractions of your own. If you're doing the challenge exercises, go ahead and take the next step. Figure out how to implement this when the default tab is not the first tab. And as you're looking at this, remember that the red bar is a design activity. So think about how you can change or improve the design of this initialize method to make it better for the person who's using it. We will look at both of those issues next time. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.